The mental drug that makes a man addicted, Carl Jung. A man sleeps with the one he can, but he becomes obsessively attached to the woman who awakens that one feeling in him. And no, it's not what you're thinking right now. Forget everything you believe you know about attraction. Forget magazines, your friends' advice, and Hollywood movies. We're not talking here about some secret technique in bed. Not about a flawless body or a symmetrical face. Not even about being the most open and entertaining woman in the room. That is the beginner's game. It catches attention, yes, but attention is cheap. It evaporates as quickly as it appears. What we are speaking about today lives on a deeper level, one that cannot be photographed, styled, or rehearsed in front of a mirror. It is invisible, but it governs everything. It is about a switch in the brain, a neurological mechanism buried deep in a man's limbic system. A switch so old, so primal, that within seconds it can distinguish between an ordinary encounter and the beginning of a mental fixation, between a memory that fades and a presence that lingers. And this is where confusion begins for so many women. Have you ever wondered why the man who seemed intensely interested suddenly turned cold? Why did you give everything you had? Love, warmth, attentiveness, and emotional intelligence, and still he drifted towards someone else? Or the most painful question of all, why do some women without obvious effort, without perfection, inspire a kind of irrational loyalty in men? While you feel as if you have to fight for every scrap of attention, the answer is uncomfortable. Because it takes the focus away from what you do and places it squarely on what you awaken. Physical desire is easy. It is primitive. It responds to curves, novelty, and availability. It lights up quickly and burns out just as fast. That is not the desire that changes a man. The real question is not how to make a man want you. The real question is how to enter his mind in such a way that he cannot easily leave it. There is a difference between being wanted and being remembered. And that difference is not decided in bed. It is decided quietly, internally, on a battlefield most people never even realize exists. Inside his mind, there is a filter, a ruthless one. Every interaction, every conversation, every shared silence passes through it, and this filter makes a binary decision. Is this experience interchangeable, pleasant but replaceable, or does it contain something rare enough to be stored, anchored, protected? Most attraction advice aims at pleasing this filter temporarily. Enough charm for a night, enough chemistry for a weekend, enough excitement for a short chapter, but it never delivers the element that forces the gate to open fully, the element that moves an experience from short-term pleasure into a long-term imprint. This is why trying harder rarely works. It exhausts you and leaves him unchanged. Carl Jung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." What we are doing here is exactly that. We are pulling something out of the unconscious realm of attraction and placing it under a clear light. Because when you understand this mechanism, you are no longer at the mercy of confusion. You stop racing for approval. You stop sculpting yourself into a product. You begin to work with the operating system itself. Pop culture has lied to you in a subtle way. It tells you attraction is a checklist. Beauty, charm, sexual openness, emotional availability, adaptability. And so women invest enormous energy trying to tick every box. But then reality intervenes. Perfect women are left. Men disengage. Interest fades. And at the same time, other women, imperfect by those standards, evoke devotion that borders on obsession. This contradiction is not accidental. It exists because we have been knocking on the wrong door. There is the door of the body, loud, obvious, easy to open. And then there is the door of the mind, silent, guarded, selective. The difference between a woman who is an option and a woman who becomes a priority is decided behind that second door. Inside a man's psyche, attraction transforms only when something touches his sense of identity. When the encounter does not just stimulate him, but challenges him. When it does not flatter his ego, but awakens his awareness. This is where most strategies fail. They try to be impressive. They try to be pleasing. They try to be desirable. But none of those things are rare. They are available everywhere. What is rare is the experience of standing in front of a woman who does not need him to validate her existence. A woman who is not auditioning. A woman who is rooted in herself. Carl Jung described this force when he said, "The meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed." Notice the word transformation. Not excitement, not pleasure. Transformation. And transformation requires friction. A man can desire many women, but he becomes attached to the woman who alters his internal state, the one who causes a shift from "I want her" to "Who am I in her presence?" This is the pivot point. Because desire says, "I want to possess." Attachment says, "I want to be worthy." At this level, attraction stops being consumption and starts becoming identification. He does not just want access to your body. He wants proximity to your essence. He wants to understand you, to be recognized by you, to stand in your field. And that brings us to the word most people underestimate: admiration. Not admiration as performance, not admiration as praise, but admiration as recognition of substance, of depth, of inner structure. Admiration activates something in the male psyche that physical attraction cannot. It engages his sense of purpose, competence, and self-evaluation. It invites him into growth. Carl Jung put it simply, "Where love rules, there is no will to power." When a man feels admiration rather than domination or competition, his defenses soften. He is no longer trying to win. He is trying to rise. This is why the woman who awakens admiration does not chase. She does not need to. Her presence creates a gravitational pull. And here is where the misunderstanding begins to hurt women. Society teaches you to dim this quality, to be less intense, less sure, less defined. Because you've been told that strength intimidates men, that story is only half true. Strength does not intimidate a mature man. It exposes an immature one. A man who collapses in the presence of your light is not overwhelmed by you. He is confronted by himself. And that confrontation is unbearable for someone who has avoided his own growth. Carl Jung warned people will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own souls, including leaving a woman who mirrors back their untapped potential. At this stage, you must understand something vital. Your task is not to become smaller. Your task is to become clearer. Clarity is magnetic. The woman who awakens obsession is not mysterious because she hides. She is compelling because she is whole. She does not dilute her opinions. She does not apologize for her passions. She does not shrink her world to fit into someone else's. She stands in her own center. And that center becomes the axis around which everything else begins to move. This is where the story truly begins. She stands in her own center. And that is precisely what makes her dangerous to the wrong men and irresistible to the right ones. Because when a man encounters a woman who is internally anchored, something subtle but profound happens. He cannot immediately place her. She does not fit neatly into the familiar categories his mind has learned to navigate. She is not trying to impress him, but she is not indifferent either. She is present but not available in the way he is used to. And this creates a tension his psyche cannot ignore. Most men move through the world unconsciously ranking themselves. Stronger or weaker. Smarter or duller. More successful or less. This is not cruelty. It is instinct. It is how the masculine psyche orients itself in hierarchy and meaning. When he meets a woman who is chasing his approval, the hierarchy is already decided. He relaxes, he consumes, he enjoys, and eventually he loses interest. But when he meets a woman who is deeply engaged in her own life, who is not asking to be chosen but is quietly choosing herself every day, the hierarchy becomes unclear and uncertainty is stimulating. His attention sharpens, he watches more closely. He listens differently, not because she is withholding, but because she is whole. This is the moment attraction deepens or collapses. Here is the paradox most people miss. Men do not become attached when they feel needed. They become attached when they feel challenged. Not challenged in combat, not challenged intellectually as an opponent, but challenged existentially, as in, this woman is living at a level that calls me upward. This is why trying to be easy, agreeable, and endlessly supportive often backfires. It soothes him, but it does not move him. Comfort is not attachment. Comfort is stasis. Attachment is born from inner movement, and inner movement only happens when something disrupts the familiar narrative a man has about himself. This is where admiration becomes the catalyst. Not admiration you give him, but admiration he feels for you. The moment a man genuinely admires a woman, the polarity shifts. He stops seeing her as a reward and starts seeing her as a reference point. Her standards become meaningful. Her approval becomes earned, not assumed. Her presence becomes something to protect, not take for granted. And this is why admiration cannot be faked. You cannot manufacture it with techniques or calculated behavior. It arises organically when you are aligned with your own values, interests, and direction. Think about how men speak about women they cannot forget. They rarely say, "She was so hot." That fades. Instead, they say things like, "She was different," or "She had something," or "Being around her made me think." That something is not a mystery in the theatrical sense. It is coherence, inner coherence. When your words, actions, boundaries, and passions are aligned, you transmit a sense of integrity. And integrity is profoundly attractive because it signals psychological safety and depth at the same time. But here is where many women sabotage themselves without realizing it. They confuse strength with hardness. They believe that to be respected, they must be dominant. That to be admired, they must overpower. That to avoid being overlooked, they must compete. This is where polarity dies. Masculine energy thrives in purpose, direction, and challenge. Feminine energy thrives in presence, receptivity, and expression. When a woman turns her strength into combat, she does not become more attractive. She becomes exhausting, not because she is wrong, but because she is misdirecting her power. There is a profound difference between standing in your truth and proving your superiority. One invites connection, the other creates resistance. A man does not pull away from a woman because she is intelligent. He pulls away because he feels constantly evaluated in her presence. He does not retreat because she is successful. He retreats because he feels unnecessary. Men want to feel useful, not as servants, but as contributors. When a woman unconsciously communicates, "I don't need you at all," she may be expressing independence, but what he hears is exclusion. This is why warmth matters. Warmth does not mean weakness. Warmth is the signal that your strength is not hostile, that your independence does not erase his relevance, that your world has space for another without collapsing into dependence. The woman who triggers deep attachment knows how to hold this balance intuitively. She does not shrink, but she also does not harden. She allows admiration to arise naturally by being fully engaged with her own life while remaining open to his. She listens not to agree, but to understand. She speaks not to dominate, but to express. She disagrees without contempt. She succeeds without comparison. And this combination is rare because it requires self-trust. Most people are either trying to be liked or trying to be superior. Very few are simply being themselves without agenda. And it is precisely this lack of agenda that disarms the male psyche. When a man senses that you are not trying to get anything from him, not validation, not status, not rescue, his defenses drop. He becomes curious. He leans in. He starts investing emotionally without realizing it. Investment precedes attachment. This is why the woman who awakens obsession is not the one who gives the most, but the one who inspires the most. Inspires thought, inspires effort, inspires growth. And this brings us to a critical moment of discernment, because once you start living from this place, something unavoidable happens. Some men will disappear, not dramatically, quietly. They will lose interest. They will grow distant. They will label you as intimidating, intense, or difficult. This is not rejection. This is filtration. A man who cannot tolerate your wholeness is not failing you. He is revealing himself. And this is where many women panic. They interpret his withdrawal as proof that they should soften, adapt, and compromise more. They dim their light to keep him comfortable. This is the moment everything breaks. Because the moment you make yourself smaller to keep a man, you lose the very quality that made you magnetic. And even if he stays, something inside you begins to erode. Respect fades. Attraction collapses. And resentment takes its place. The woman who awakens lasting attachment understands that. Compatibility is not about chemistry alone. It is about capacity. Can he stand in the presence of your becoming? If not, he will try to stop it. A man who is aligned with you does not ask you to be less. He asks himself how to be more. This is the difference between a boy and a man. And here is the most liberating truth of all. You do not need to decide who he is. His reaction to your authenticity will decide for you. When you stop performing and start inhabiting your life fully, men either rise or remove themselves. Both outcomes are victories, because the goal was never to be chosen, the goal was to be met. And in the next movement of this journey, something even more subtle emerges, because admiration alone is powerful, but admiration without polarity can become platonic. So the question becomes deeper. How do you allow admiration to turn into desire without losing yourself? How do you let him feel challenged and drawn without slipping into competition or control? That answer does not live in strategy. It lives in embodiment. And that is where we go next. It lives in embodiment. Because embodiment is where everything you have understood so far stops being an idea and starts becoming a felt experience. It is the difference between knowing something intellectually and transmitting it energetically. And attraction, real attraction, does not respond to words. It responds to states. A man does not fall for what you explain. He falls for what he feels when he is near you. This is why so many women do everything right and still feel unseen. They understand the theory. They have the insight. They can articulate their value. But their body is still operating from an old program. Tension, overgiving, self-monitoring, and subtle anxiety about whether they are enough. And the male nervous system reads that instantly. Before a man registers your beauty, your intelligence, or your story, his body asks a single silent question. How do I feel in her presence? Do I feel expanded or contracted, calm or tense, energized or drained? This is where embodiment becomes decisive. A woman who awakens obsession is not hyper-aware of herself. She is aware of herself, yes, but she is not managing the moment. She is inhabiting it. Her attention is not split between him and her internal commentary about him. She is not scanning for signals. She is not adjusting in real time to maintain interest. She is simply there, and paradoxically, that is what pulls him in. Because presence is rare in a distracted world. Presence communicates confidence without words. It signals that you trust yourself enough to stay rooted in your own experience. This is what allows admiration to convert into desire. Admiration alone can create respect, fascination, and even inspiration. But desire requires polarity. And polarity is not created by effort. It is created by groundedness. When you are grounded, you stop chasing reactions. You stop filling silence out of nervousness. You stop performing emotional labor to keep the connection alive. You allow space. And space is where desire breathes. Many women fear space because they associate it with loss. They think if they don't engage, initiate, nurture, or explain, the connection will die. But this fear itself collapses polarity. It turns attraction into maintenance. A man becomes emotionally attached when he feels he is stepping towards something meaningful, not when he feels carried. This does not mean withdrawal or coldness. It means restraint, not withholding affection, but withholding self-abandonment. You speak when you feel moved, not because silence scares you. You share when it feels true, not because you want to be chosen. You express desire without chasing the outcome. This is embodied confidence, and it does something powerful to a man's psyche. It activates pursuit, not as a game, but as alignment. He does not feel manipulated. He feels invited. Here is where things often go wrong. Some women, after discovering their power, swing to the opposite extreme. They become rigid, guarded, and unreachable. They mistake emotional unavailability for self-respect. But unavailability is not polarity. It is distance. True polarity is warmth with boundaries, openness without collapse, and strength without armor. A woman who embodies this does not disappear emotionally. She is responsive, not reactive. She is expressive, not performative. When she laughs, it is because she is amused, not because she wants approval. When she touches, it is because she feels connection, not because she wants to secure it. This authenticity is intoxicating because it cannot be faked for long. And men sense that. They sense when a woman's femininity is not a strategy, but a state. When her softness is not submission, but confidence in her own center. When her receptivity is not needed, but generosity. This is where sexual energy deepens, not through escalation, but through resonance. A look held half a second longer because it feels right. A pause before a kiss because the moment has weight. A quiet confidence in your body that says, I am here, and I am not in a hurry. Hurry kills desire. Hurry says, I need this to go somewhere. Presence says this is already somewhere. And men respond to that distinction more than they realize. Now, let's touch the most sensitive point of all, control. Many women unconsciously try to control attraction. They manage pacing, communication, and emotional tone. They believe control equals safety. But desire does not grow under control. It grows under trust. Trust in yourself. When you trust yourself, you don't need to control his reactions. You don't need to analyze every message. You don't need reassurance disguised as conversation. You are okay with uncertainty because your identity is not tied to the outcome. This inner freedom is what creates external magnetism. Because a man can feel when a woman's happiness does not depend on him, and instead of making him feel irrelevant, it makes him feel chosen when he is included. Chosen, not used. This is a crucial distinction. A woman who needs a man makes him anxious. A woman who wants a man makes him feel desired. A woman who does not need or want him but welcomes him makes him feel honored. And honor is deeply erotic to the masculine psyche. It touches pride, purpose, and belonging all at once. This is why the woman who awakens obsession often seems effortless, not because she is passive, but because she is not forcing alignment. She allows compatibility to reveal itself. She does not chase potential. She observes behavior. She does not argue to be understood. She expresses and watches how it lands. She does not negotiate her worth. She lives it. And here is the moment where everything becomes irreversible. Once you embody this way of being, you cannot go back. You cannot unsee how much energy you once spent trying to be chosen. You cannot unfeel the relief of standing on yourself. You cannot unlearn the difference between connection that drains you and connection that feeds you. And something else happens. Your standards recalibrate. Not artificially, not as a list, but organically. You stop tolerating inconsistency. You stop romanticizing effortless disrespect. You stop explaining your boundaries. Not because you are cold, but because you are full. And fullness changes the game. Because fullness is attractive without trying. At this point, admiration is no longer something you seek from him. It is something that arises between you. Mutual, alive, dynamic, and desire becomes a byproduct, not a goal. This is when a man stops asking, "Can I have her?" and starts asking, "Can I keep up with her?" Not out of fear, but out of respect. And respect is the soil where obsession takes root. In the next movement, we go even deeper. Because once admiration and embodiment are present, something intimate happens. Desire begins to express itself physically. But this is not about technique. It is about timing, restraint, and meaning. Because a kiss, when it comes from this place, is no longer just a kiss. It is a declaration. It is a declaration, not spoken, but felt. Not rushed, but weighted. Because when admiration and embodiment converge, physical closeness stops being impulsive and starts being symbolic. A kiss becomes a threshold, a crossing, a moment where two inner worlds acknowledge each other. This is where many connections collapse without anyone understanding why. Because when physical intimacy happens before psychological alignment, it drains the mystery instead of deepening it. But when it happens after admiration has taken root, it amplifies everything. It does not satisfy desire. It multiplies it. A man remembers the kiss that made him feel seen far longer than the kiss that merely excited him. Why? Because the body follows meaning. When a man feels that touching you is not entitlement but privilege, something ancient activates. His nervous system registers risk, value, and reward all at once. And that combination is unforgettable. This is why timing matters more than technique. A woman who embodies herself does not rush intimacy to secure connection. She allows intimacy to emerge as an expression of connection. The difference is subtle, but it changes everything. One comes from fear of loss, the other comes from fullness. When intimacy comes from fullness, it carries gravity. There is no need to escalate artificially, no need to perform the desire, no need to prove openness. Your presence already communicates availability without urgency, and urgency is what kills polarity. Polarity thrives in tension that feels safe, in closeness that still allows distance, desire that is invited, not demanded. This is why a pause before a kiss can be more intoxicating than the kiss itself. That pause is where imagination ignites, where his mind fills the space with anticipation, where attachment begins to coil quietly. Men do not attach when everything is given. They attach when something meaningful is earned. Not earned through games, but through resonance. At this stage, another fear often arises in women. The fear of losing momentum, of seeming uninterested, of sending the wrong signal. But when you are embodied, signals are not confusing. They are coherent. You do not pull away to create desire. You remain present without pushing. You do not disappear to be chased. You stay rooted and let him approach. This is the difference between manipulation and magnetism. Magnetism does not chase. It does not retreat. It simply holds its field. And men respond to that field instinctively. When a man steps into it, he feels something stabilize inside him, a sense of orientation. He is not guessing where he stands, but he is not taking it for granted either. There is clarity without collapse. This is what allows desire to deepen instead of burn out. Now, let's address something crucial. Admiration does not mean a pedestal. When a man admires you, he should not feel smaller. He should feel inspired. There is a fine but vital distinction. Admiration that humiliates repels. Admiration that elevates attracts. This is why how you hold your power matters as much as the fact that you have it. Power expressed as comparison creates distance. Power expressed as self-possession creates pull. A woman who awakens deep attachment does not constantly demonstrate her worth. She lives it quietly, consistently, without commentary. Her boundaries are not announced. They are enforced by behavior. Her standards are not explained. They are embodied. She does not say, "I deserve better." She chooses better. And men notice this not consciously, but viscerally. Carl Jung wrote, "What you resist persists." Many women resist their own depth because they fear rejection. They hide their intensity. They dilute their curiosity. They soften their convictions. And in doing so, they create the very emptiness they fear. Depth is not the problem. Suppression is. When you suppress your true rhythm, your true interests, and your true pace, you create a subtle dissonance. And dissonance is unattractive. Not because it is wrong, but because it signals fragmentation. Men are drawn to coherence. They may not articulate it that way, but they feel it. They feel when a woman is congruent with herself, when her body, voice, choices, and boundaries align. This alignment is calming and stimulating at the same time. It creates trust without predictability, familiarity without boredom. This is where obsession begins to take shape. Not as desperation, not as fixation, but as a repeated return. He thinks of you not because he lacks options, but because your presence reorganized something in him. Because time with you felt different, slower, fuller, sharper. And here is where restraint becomes an act of power. Restraint is not denial. It is discernment. You do not rush to define the connection. You allow it to reveal itself. You do not force labels. You observe behavior. You let consistency speak. This patience is not passive. It is intentional. It signals that you are not afraid of time. A woman who trusts time is deeply attractive because time exposes truth. And a man who feels rushed feels evaluated. A man who feels observed feels invited to rise. Now, something subtle shifts when you operate this way. Your nervous system begins to relax. You stop bracing for disappointment. You stop scanning for red flags obsessively. You stop trying to control outcomes emotionally. And in that relaxation, you become more alive, more playful, more intuitive. Your laughter becomes unforced. Your silence becomes comfortable. Your eye contact becomes steady. And steadiness is erotic because steadiness communicates safety without submission. This is the point where many men become confused. They feel deeply drawn, but they cannot explain why. They feel compelled to invest, but they do not feel pressured. They feel seen, but not analyzed. This combination is rare, and rarity creates value. But let's be honest, this path is not for everyone. It requires you to tolerate uncertainty, to sit in not knowing, and to allow things to unfold without gripping them. It requires you to trust that what aligns will stay, and what does not was never meant to. This trust is what separates women who experience repeated emotional burnout from women who experience depth. Because depth does not come from intensity, it comes from integration. When your inner world is integrated, your outer connections follow. And this brings us to the final movement, because everything we have explored so far leads to a single, unavoidable truth. The woman who awakens obsession is not trying to be unforgettable. She is unforgettable because she remembers herself. And when you remember yourself fully, something extraordinary happens. You stop asking whether you are enough. You start asking whether the connection honors who you are becoming. And that question changes everything. In the final part, we arrive at the core, the point where attraction, self-respect, and destiny intersect, where the focus shifts permanently away from being chosen and toward choosing. Because the deepest form of power is not being desired. It is being sovereign. Because sovereignty is what remains when all strategies fall away. When you are no longer orienting yourself around reaction, approval, or outcome. When your sense of worth is no longer negotiated moment by moment in someone else's presence, a sovereign woman does not ask, "How do I keep him?" She asks, "Does this connection expand or contract my life?" And that single shift is what turns attraction into destiny. When you become sovereign, your energy changes in a way that is impossible to imitate. You are no longer trying to be chosen, so every interaction becomes lighter. You are no longer auditioning, so your nervous system softens. You are no longer afraid of loss, because you are not empty without him. And this is the moment men feel something they rarely feel and almost never name. Reverence. Not worship, not fear, reverence. A quiet recognition that this woman is not an accessory to his life. She is a force in her own right. A life already in motion, a fire already burning. This is why the metaphor of the fire matters so deeply. A small flame needs protection. It flickers with every gust of wind. It anxiously searches for fuel, and anyone standing nearby feels pressure to keep it alive. A blazing fire is different. It does not beg for wood. It radiates warmth. It attracts naturally. People come closer, not out of obligation, but out of desire. When you live from sovereignty, you stop asking others to sustain you emotionally. You sustain yourself through your interests, your work, your curiosity, your discipline, your joy, and your solitude. And paradoxically, this self-sufficiency is what creates the deepest bonds. Because a man does not feel trapped near a sovereign woman. He feels free. Free to choose her. Free to rise. Free to bring his best. Not because he must, but because he wants to. This is where obsession in its healthiest form is born. Not obsession with you as an object, but obsession with the life that emerges in your presence. He does not think, "I need her, so I don't feel alone." He thinks, with her, "I become more myself." And that is the rarest desire of all. At this point, the dynamic reverses completely. You are no longer trying to hold his attention. His attention is already engaged. You are no longer explaining your boundaries. He senses them. You are no longer asking for consistency. You are observing whether it exists. You stop chasing emotional clarity. You allow clarity to reveal itself through behavior. And here's the truth few people say out loud. Not every man is meant to walk beside a sovereign woman. Some are meant to encounter her only briefly, to be awakened, unsettled, inspired, and then released. Others will feel the call and answer it. They will grow, stretch, and meet her there. Both roles matter because not every connection is meant to last. Some are meant to initiate transformation. Carl Jung said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." This entire journey was never about mastering attraction. It was about returning to yourself. When you live this way, attraction becomes a side effect, not a pursuit. Love becomes an addition, not a remedy. A partnership becomes a meeting of two complete worlds. not a rescue mission. And something else happens that is quietly miraculous. Even if a man leaves, even if a connection ends, even if timing interferes, you are not diminished. You do not spiral into self-doubt. You do not question your worth. You do not replay every moment trying to find what you did wrong, because you did not abandon yourself to get him, and what you do not abandon, you do not lose. This is the deepest safety you can ever give yourself. So when you stand in front of the mirror now, do not ask how to be more attractive. Ask how to be more aligned, more honest, and more alive. Ask yourself what would make your life richer, even if no one were watching. Because when you choose that path, everything changes. Men sense it, opportunities respond to it, life opens to it. You stop being a woman who hopes to be unforgettable. You become a woman who leaves a mark simply by being who she is. And if a man thinks of you years from now in a quiet moment, it will not be because of how you looked or how available you were. It will be because being near you reminded him of something he had forgotten, that he too was meant to burn. And that is the kind of imprint no time can erase.